we're good. Yeah, so it's my pleasure to invite have our today's speaker, Dean Radin. Um, uh, you know, I was looking over the intro stuff. So Dean is chief scientist at the Institute for Noetic Science. Um, he's also a professor in the California Institute of Integral Studies. Um, he got his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and physics from the University of Massachusetts, and then a master's degree in electrical engineering in psychology, and PhD in psychology. I got that mixed up, but whatever. He's got a bunch of degrees, PhD in psychology from University of Illinois, a bunch of prestigious places. And among other things, before he was at Noetic Science, he was professor at, is it University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He had appointments at Princeton, SRI, but he also worked at the same time that I did for the Interval Corporation, which was a think tank started by Paul Allen. So it was kind of neat for me. Like I got to see some of his research, like in practice and stuff like that. He's really he's written hundreds of articles, 4 best-selling books. One of them just came out. So that's, in some ways, this is like a book tour here. We get to hear about his new book, maybe. I think he's considered one of the like most rigorous people that does research in parapsychology and things like that. And what did I looked up another bio here. In 2017, he was named one of the 100 most inspiring people in the whole world by like a German magazine. Um, so it's like, hey, we got really famous, like inspiring people here now. So I guess the title of the talk, I left that up there. I remember it was Raiden of the Lost Ark, and then the Science of Magic, something like that. If you, we have a really cool graphic of that that's on our the Canvas page. If you want to
I'm
look
going
at
to
it.
show it again.
Oh, good. And yet Dean made that himself, and I thought, like, well, how cool is
Yeah,
that?
but Mike came up with the title. I thought it was great.
All right. Well, so you can should be able to share. Uh,
I can indeed. There we go. Now, you failed to mention my honorary doctorate.
yeah, you're right. There's too many awards that you won. I couldn't name them all.
Well, I'm particularly proud of that one because it's in yoga research, and it's from a university in Bangalore, India. Here's the Raiden of the Lost Ark. I thought that's a good look. I almost got a fedora for this purpose, but I decided not to.
You should. I think it's
So here, this is a picture of me giving a lecture at Harvard Medical School about a month ago. And I'm going to return to that image there, the telepathy image on the screen. There are about 400 people, maybe 500 in that auditorium. It's pretty big. I was advised beforehand, even though I was invited to give the talk, not to talk about magic because people's heads would explode. And also to be careful, given that I was talking about things like telepathy, in order to prevent a riot. So I'm thinking, well, what am I giving a talk for then? What's going on here? But I managed to do it, and a lot of people came up afterwards, and of course, immediately wanted to tell me their psychic stories. So it happens a lot. So there I am at the podium. If any of you are interested in UFOs, you may have seen this documentary recently, The Age of Disclosure, which is pretty impressive. One of the people on that show is Hal Puthoff, who's well known for this line of work. And I worked with Hal when I was on the Stargate program way back when. In fact, there I am with Hal at a conference the next day after the Harvard one was one at MIT. So we were both at that conference. So that was just last week.
um,
So my latest book came out last month, Science of Magic. What do I mean by magic? I'm talking about basically the word as a placeholder for some phenomenon X that we don't know what it is yet. And the word surprisingly shows up in lots of different areas. You find it in nuclear physics, Find it in condensed matter physics and spectroscopy, chemistry, astronomy, computer science, quantum computing. It's used a lot because it's an easy way to have a placeholder for something that produces awe in a scientist because it's doing something that it shouldn't be able to do. And so it's called magic. And you see this again and again. So in a sense, that's what I'm saying as well, that there are magical things, except that in this case, it has to do with human experience. And of course, there's Magic Johnson. So magic. What kind of magic? Frequently reported anomalous human experiences. What do I mean by anomalous? Well, you'd be very familiar with this as a visual illusion. And of course, you look at that and glance at it, and your brain tells you everything is fine. It's not so fine. And so if you're looking in the wrong lens, you can look and say, everything looks perfectly normal to me, except if you have a better telescope, say, maybe not. Maybe there's an anomaly going on here. And of course, the reason why I'm interested in anomalies is exactly the same reason that William James had his famous phrase around the accredited and orderly facts of every science. There ever floats a sort of dust cloud of exceptional observations. Anyone will renovate his science who will look steadily after the irregular phenomena. So my entire career has been looking after the irregular phenomena. I'm not that interested in things that are conventional. Once you have a collider, every problem starts to look like a particle. And this, of course, is a kind of a confirmation bias, which is found throughout the sciences, and it creates blinders. So again, the reason why anomalies are important is because you want to teach an old dog new tricks, you have to entertain new ideas and maybe end up burning some of the old methods. So on a slightly different track is the idea that every time we've extended our senses throughout history, each time that has happened, it uncovers realms of knowledge that were previously not even imagined. Each time. And so we're going to continue to do that. We're doing it today with AI and other methods. With the Webb telescope is finding that maybe our cosmology is wrong. In fact, every single time that one of these instruments came along, our whole worldview changes. So it's important in this case because it again is like anomalies that our worldview is not fixed, even though there are many scientists who sort of collapse into a worldview and find it very difficult to see beyond it. That's one of the reasons why anomalies have always attracted me, because I never had the sense that we actually understand what's going on in almost any domain. There's some domains that are pretty good, but a lot of times there are major gaps. So what are the kinds of anomalies that I'm interested in? Well, things like genius. Like we know there are people out there, a couple of them, that are kind of like Mozart and don't really understand how that can be. Savants, the whole spectrum of savantism is very interesting. Terminal lucidity, near-death experience, those sorts of things. And psychic phenomena primarily of interest to me because you can take it in the lab. So most of my work is empiricism, it's in the laboratory. And I work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was founded by Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to step on the moon. And when he looked at the Earth from space, like a little marble, it provoked I don't know that provoke is the right word, but it created a mystical experience. He felt a palpable unity with everything in the universe, not as an abstract idea, but as a felt experience. And so he was so shocked by that that he decided that when he returned to the Earth, that he would explore the outer limits of inner space, because he had already explored as far as any human had ever gone to that point in outer space, and that was quite exciting. He felt it would be just as exciting, if not more so, to look at inner space. So that was the foundation of our institute. And one of the things that we do then to look for clues as to what might be interesting to study are spiritual traditions, all of which suggests that if you do the practice of that particular path, most of which is meditation, one form or another, you will begin to bump into phenomena that today we would call psychic. So you find in the yogic traditions, the siddhis, that's one of the reasons why I got the honorary doctorate. In Catholicism, there are the charisms. In Buddhism, the Idi, Karamats of Islam, Shu of Taoism, Moffitt of the Kabbalah, Western esoteric traditions is magic, and it's just called psi today. They're all basically the same thing. So in the modern realm, we think of telepathy as somehow people feel connected at a distance. Psychokinesis is intention being impressed into the physical world. If you're a magician, you would call it enchantment. Clairvoyance is information from the world getting into your mind from a distance. If you were a magician, I mean a real magician, you would call that divination. And if it's slipped in time, it's precognition. So that's what we can study in the laboratory. The challenge is, how do we get from a worldview that was magical, supernatural, had elements of the divine, into a rational, natural world scientific worldview? How do we do that? And if you talk to a psychiatrist, you'll say, well, people who are talking about these phenomena, we're talking about psychopathology. These people are delusional, there's dissociation, they have narcissistic disorders of the overt type. Or if you talk to most academic psychologists, you think you're clairvoyant, but your brain is just tricking you. These are hallmarks of psychosis, of mental illness, and so on. That's pretty much the mainstream view in the academic world. So we return back to that image I was presenting, because the way that I usually talk about this to audiences that I haven't pre-calibrated, meaning I don't know what they think about this, I simply say, how many in the audience, raise your hand, have ever had an experience kind of like this scenario where the mother suddenly feels her knee is in pain because her kid somewhere else fell off his bike and scraped his knee? So that would be considered a case of crisis telepathy. I see that, Timothy, you have your hand up. Oh, yes. Okay. So, yeah, I would say I would call this a telesomatic experience because there's no cognition of what it was. She didn't even know it was her child, but nevertheless, she gets the pain. It's telesomatic. So, of all of the varieties of different kinds of psychic experiences people have had, I've had this one the most often, where I will feel a very strange pain, and I can't tell if it's mine or it's somebody else. But in many cases, it turns out to be somebody else's who I know, like a loved one. And it's quite annoying because I think, well, I'm coming down with something, or my liver hurts, or what is going on here? And it turns out to be someone else. It also turns out that it occurs so often that one time I give a talk at the Naval War College to a group of officers who are being prepared to be promoted either to admiral or, in the case of the Marines, into generals. And so this is the top brass who are transitioning from field assignments where they are interested in tactical information or tactical knowledge into strategic knowledge. And so they're exposed to a very broad range of different kinds of ideas. So I talked to them about the Stargate program, and one element of which was how does telepathy work? And I'll go through that information in a minute. But so I gave them this whole lecture, and afterwards, these two sub-commanders came up and said, well, we have a story for you. Both of them independently said that while they're under maneuvers at some classified depth, a crewman woke up in the middle of their nighttime and said, we have to surface immediately because something has gone wrong at home. And so I need to call home to find out what it was. And so, of course, the sub-commander said, well, we can't surface now because we're under maneuvers. They could remain submerged for months. So the next time they were able to surface, they did call home, and the sailor was right, or the submariner was right, that something bad had happened at home. So I asked the commanders, how often does this happen? Or how many false positives do you get? And the answer is none. They each had, in one of their missions, one submariner wake up and try to get them to surface immediately. They could not, and later were confirmed that what they were saying was true. So this is important not only because it happens, but because submariners are specifically selected because they are extremely stable psychologically. And they're not the kind of person you would imagine. It's not the stereotype of somebody who's going to have a spontaneous psychic experience. But more importantly, they're 300 or more meters below the surface of the water. And electromagnetic waves can get down there, but they're extremely long frequency. They're miles long. And so if you're a submerged submarine, you want to get a signal from land, it's not that easy, but there are methods that do it. But you have to, if you're under the water, you drag an antenna that might be several miles long in order to pick it up. And it can transmit about 1 character per minute. So how would somebody get a rich experience, in this case, that was in their dream state, that would take a minute to get a single character transmitted? And the answer is probably can't. So it's a good way of confirming what we've already known, that the whatever telepathy is, it's not mediated by electromagnetic signals. So how do we do this in a laboratory? Well, the classic method is called the Ganzfeld state. It was developed by Gestalt therapists in the 1930s, I think. But the way we do it is you pick 4 pictures which are different from each other, make a random decision, you select one of them, and now you tell someone who acts the role of the sender to send that image, that meaning of the image, the symbol of the image, to a person who is secured at a distant location. So the Ganzfeld state is you sit in a comfy chair, you wear headphones playing white noise, and you have a ping pong ball over each eye, a half a ping pong ball. So all you can see is red, all you can hear is unpatterned noise, and you're in a comfy chair. So that produces a hypnagogic state in probably 5 minutes or so. So if the receiving person is lucky, they will get some sort of a vague impression of a tiger or something. And then you take the person out of the Ganzfeld state, show them the 4 pictures, and so you can tell at a glance that they're going to be right by chance half or a quarter of the time. And they can't do better than that unless they're getting information from somewhere else. So when you look at the entire database from around 1970 to last meta-analysis, 2020, over 100 publications, 42 authors, 20 laboratories, that's chance, that's the observed hit rate. The odds against chance, 2.96 trillion to 1. So that's a big odds against chance. The magnitude of the effect isn't all that big. Here's chance, this dotted line. There's where our hit rates are, cumulative hit rates over many, many tests. And the important thing is that for the past 20 years or so, it's been stable. There's enough data now for the hit rates to have stabilized. And of course, the error bars keep getting smaller and smaller with time. This is mostly unselected college sophomores. So people who are doing the test come in as a pair, choose a friend or not a friend if you don't have one, which would be very sad. But nevertheless, they come in, and if we check people then and pull them out of the pool according to whether they report spontaneous telepathic experiences, then they're actually hitting up there. So we get some confirmation that when people say that they're psychic or they have these experiences, even in the laboratory, we can see that they actually do better than Joe Sixpack drawn in off the street. Of course, in each case in these experiments, we have a due diligence list to make sure we're not fooling ourselves. So the most likely way that this would be faked or as a mistake would be sensory leakage. So we make sure that that's not going to happen. And we also look for possible electromagnetic signaling. If somebody had a cell phone, for example, or recording mistakes, this huge long list of things we go through on every experiment, including checking for fraud, because you could have a situation set up with maybe a research assistant and somebody in the laboratory who are doing collusion. And so we have magicians vet the process and the environment to make sure that they couldn't figure out how to make it work as a trick. So that's how most of the major laboratories who do this type of experiment have had magicians come in and look at the apparatus and the methods and so on. So what we're left over with, we've looked at every other possibility. It looks like it's actually telepathy. So we'll consider another possibility here, which I call presentiment. And again, this is an example where I say, have you ever driven many times in the same direction, and you're coming to a place where you know is an intersection, you have a green light, normally you would speed up. But today, you go to the intersection and you slow down, and you don't know why you're slowing down. You just feel something is off. How many in the audience have that experience? Well, in the audience at Harvard, about a third of the audience said, "Oh, well, something like that. I've had that." So in this case, the reason why you slow down is because the bad feeling is a premonition that something is bad. And sure, in this case, somebody had shot through their red light and you would have been hit broadside if you kept going the normal speed. So like in the other experiences, we go into the laboratory and we want to simulate this without putting somebody in actual danger. So skin conductance, we actually have used many, many different measures, but skin conductance is a convenient one. So you sit in front of a screen, it's blank. You press a button, it remains blank for 5 seconds, and then a true random number generator selects a picture from a large pool of pictures. And it might be a calm picture like a bunny, might be an emotional picture like a snake, stays on screen for 3 seconds. The screen goes blank for 10 seconds, and then they repeat this, and then they're finished. So what you see in this, oh, here's an example of a calm picture, an example of an emotional picture. Typically, the calm pictures are about like that. The emotional pictures, this is a negative emotional picture. We could also use positive emotional pictures to look at the affect and valence in both directions. And so if you do standard psychophysiology tests, you know that at the moment of the stimulus, you're getting an emotional or a calm picture that you have a very characteristic response. This is skin conductance. So we just look beforehand. We say, well, from the moment that we press the button, let's start recording what skin conductance was, and then just keep going. And so what you find is this. So this difference is what I call a presentiment. It's indicating that there's some element in your unconscious that seems to know what you're about to experience, and it produces a differential effect. So we've done this with skin conductance, with pupil dilation size. We get something that looks like this. So the important part here is this is the difference that we look for, that during this 3 second period, the screen is gray. So there's no, it's not that your pupil is changing because the light is changing, but something emotional happened. Well, the images show up here, and there you get this big difference. We've looked at it in EEG, where the stimuli are very calm, little light flash or an audio tone. That's all they happen. And we do this to prevent them from pulling them out of the meditative state. And so there's the difference between our controls who never meditated and the meditators. And the joke here is we did this when we had our campus in Petaluma, California, which is Northern California, where we had to recruit the meditators, long-term meditators with at least 20 years of practice, easy. Find people who had never meditated. It took forever to find people who never meditated at all, and we could match by gender and age to the meditators. So in the controls, up to 2 seconds beforehand, when they got a light flash and audio tone, no difference in their EEG. Meditators, about 1.5 seconds beforehand. And the reason we used meditators in this case is to check the experience of timelessness, which these long-term meditators often report, to see if it was ontologically true. And so the fact that we're seeing something like their present moment, which is typically 250 milliseconds or something, it was spread out in this case, spread out backwards in time to 1.5 seconds before the stimulus, which again was chosen by a true random number generator. Yes, I see a question.
Yes. Did you control or look at the type of meditation that the people did? Because different types of meditation might emphasize different things like, timelessness or mindfulness or so forth.
Yeah. These are all non-dual forms of meditation, mostly Dzogchen. So I think we had one or two Zen people as well, but not mantra, not methods that would engage you to focus, but get beyond focus and to a true non-dual state.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm. So these kinds of experiments, uh, my colleagues called it a predictive physiological anticipation effect. I like the word presentiment because there's less syllables involved. But back in 2012, there was a meta-analysis. The overall result was 10 to the minus 12th probability. And then there was an update in 2018 with another couple of dozen tests, and it confirmed that the effect is there. What's even more interesting than this experiment is this is basically standard psychophysiology just going backwards in time. So we wanted to find if there were already published examples of people doing an experiment like this for completely conventional reasons, but where we could get the raw data and look and see whether or not there was a precursor event like this. So one of my colleagues at the University of Amsterdam, the other one who was at IONS at the time, they both found data sets where people are doing this kind of experiment with skin conductance, and they both found this effect in that data. So it shows up, all of these experiments are not evoking something that is magically falling out of the sky. We're looking at effects that are basically pervasive, but finding it because we're looking for it. Whereas in a normal situation, people just don't look backwards in time because why bother? Well, that's where we look. And again, the long due diligence list of lots of possible alternative explanations, which we've gone through in great gory detail, and that none of them work. The most common is the gambler's fallacy. So if you have an unbalanced stimulus sequence, you have a whole bunch of calm in a row, you're going to think, well, the next one's got to be emotional because I haven't seen it in a long time. So you would expect a continual increase in physiological activity until the emotional one, and then it drops afterwards. That would produce an effect that looks somewhat similar to what we actually see here. And so we checked in the data to see, do you get this kind of a continual increase? And the answer is no, you don't. And it's largely because while people will naturally fall into a gambler's fallacy, these experiments are too short and people generally only do it once. So they don't exactly know what they're going to do. And so you don't get that effect. And colleagues have also run experiments where there is a single emotional trial, just one. And there's like a whole bunch and of course, we don't tell people in advance exactly what's going to happen in this thing. And in those cases, generally the emotional trial is not quite as emotional as we'd otherwise use because we don't want to freak people out. But nevertheless, that's the one where we see this effect. So another case, feeling of being stared at. So I was trying desperately to get the Gemini to give me a picture of two people, like one of them at a cafe and the other one far away, one looking at the other from behind. It could not figure out what I was saying. So this is as close as I was able to get. So yeah, if you're the person here that's raw dogging it, as they call it, and just zoning out, I think you probably would recognize that there's somebody within inches of you. So, but nevertheless, in the experiments we do, they're really separated. Interestingly, 1889 in Science, Titchener was the first one to publish this idea of the feeling of being stared at. And he claimed in that article that they had tried it many times in the laboratory and it never worked. He never got the results with no data presented. So William Broad and Marilyn Schlitz started a series of experiments looking at this under very rigorous conditions where the people were really isolated. So one condition was remote intention. Just think about the person at a distance and we'll record their physiology. A second version is the sender person would actually see the receiver on closed circuit TV. And the third was called remote facilitation of attention, where this person would be doing an attentional task, like looking at a candle flame, and have to press a button every time she noticed that there was mind wandering. And so the remote person would see this on a closed circuit TV and try to mentally help her focus. And so the measurement was how many times did she press the button when being intended at versus control periods where she wasn't being intended at. And all three of these work. And our particular infrastructure, this kind of looked like that. This is a 2,000-pound solid steel double-walled shielded chamber where the receiver was. So we had their physiology measured. They were on a closed circuit camera. This was in another building next door where she could look at the monitor when it was turned on and also record her physiology. So 36 remote intention experiments, 15 remote staring, 11 remote helping. A meta-analysis across all of these studies is an effect around 10 to the minus sixth. In all cases, except for a couple early of the cases, and you could predict that what you would see is an autonomic arousal. That's how the effect would manifest in the receiving person, unless you're dealing with dyads who had practiced eye-gazing meditation. And for them to have the attention of another person, it would cause a relaxation response to get a parasympathetic push. For everyone else, it's the feeling of being stared at, like you're feeling spidey sense and somebody's watching you. What about mind-matter interaction? So it's a little bit like an experiment here involving photons. Can you bring the photons together? Yes, we can. So in this case, Jim and I did what I asked it to do. It made this little video clip. So we need a physical target system impervious to mundane influences, but responds to variations in human attention and intention. Interestingly, Sir Francis Bacon was the first one to suggest how to do this in 1627.
Mm.
Said in one of his famous books, if you want to study the force of imagination, which is what we'd call intention, toss dice and then see how they fall. So 300 years later, J.B. Ryan was doing this at Duke University. And about 2 decades later, Helmut Schmidt, a physicist, developed the first true random number generator, in this case, based on radioactive decay latencies. And then another couple of decades later, the Princeton Pear Lab started using a true random number generator that they had developed based on quantum events. And today you can buy one that looks like a memory stick, which is just as good as the one that they made at Princeton. Or if you want a really fancy one, you get one that is based on whether a photon goes through or bounces off a half silvered mirror, single photon effects. So this thing costs about $100. That thing costs almost $2,000, and they're almost as good as each other. So at Princeton, for almost 30 years, they were doing experiments using their random number generator. You would ask somebody in a series of runs to try to make the generator produce more 1 bits or more 0 bits or have a baseline where they didn't do anything. And they were able to show again and again with lots and lots of trials that that's what the random generator would do. So this is a mind-matter interaction effect on electronic true random number bits. I was at Princeton in the late 80s, and Roger Nelson and I did a meta-analysis of all of the experiments using these kinds of things, random number generators, unequivocal positive results in experimental conditions, chance results and controls. So here's the controls with error bars and lots of different ways of carving up the data by the number of the experiments, the experimenters, by quality rating, on and on and on, all kinds of things. And basically, almost every way that we looked at, we could not reduce the experimental data down to nothing. So we were reasonably convinced back in 1989 that this was a real effect.
Dean, what's that first data point, that really low one?
This one is the controls,
Not all right.
233 controls.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, 591 experiments, 67 experimenters. I forget what this one was. Probably quality rating, where we are able to assess the quality, and then other ways we carved up the database in various ways to see if we can make it go away. So this was published in Foundations of Physics, which is a mainstream physics journal, and somehow a miracle occurred and they allowed us to publish it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So you said earlier that some of the studies, like the submarine study, rule out electromagnetic electromagnetism as a mechanism.
Yeah.
And yet here you've got some kind of interaction with a quantum phenomenon that's driving the random number system, right?
Yeah.
And it probably doesn't have any of those challenges. Like it could totally be some sort of electromagnetically mediated thing that's happening. Do you think that that's, I mean, is that going to be part of the general theme of what you've uncovered is that in enough cases, the electromagnetic force is not something that can explain this?
These generators are designed in such a way that the raw output, so the raw output is a randomly moving signal based on electron tunneling. So that's what's producing. It's the timing of when the tunneling effect occurs. But you then take that and you combine it with an XOR gate, an exclusive OR gate,
Hmm.
which is alternating zeros and ones. So you do that because if this device was being influenced by something from the outside, you can't push it beyond chance. In fact, it always wants to converge into chance. In fact, if the random part broke, you would have perfect chance because you'd have the same number of zeros and ones over the long term. So this is the way that most modern random generators are created for things like cryptographic keys. If you want 512 bits that really cannot be predicted, you have a true random source and you put it not only through an XOR gate to shuffle it up, but you do it through additional things called entropy pools, where you continually are sort of mixing it together to make sure that there's nothing that is going to create a bias, including any kind of external influence, temperature, electromagnetics, magnetics, and so on. What you find is when you do apply those kinds of external effects, that if you're measuring the output in terms of the mean, it begins to converge towards the mean. And of course, it's in a metal container, it's grounded and so on, so it's already pretty well shielded. So the answer is no, it's not electromagnetics.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why do you think that the scientific establishment has been so um, unreceptive to psychic phenomena?
Well, it's all about a worldview. I have a whole other talk on this. It lasts about an hour to unpack it. But the bottom line is that we are taught as scientists that no, I take it back. We are not taught as scientists that we are working within a philosophy of science. So we have a set of assumptions that create a worldview, which is materialism, and that is a set of assumptions, and it's really, really good, but it's really, really bad for certain kinds of things, like understanding the nature of consciousness and what it can do. And so the moment you begin to entertain other philosophical ideas, anywhere between panpsychism to dual aspect monism to idealism and a whole many varieties of those, you find that you can accommodate materialism perfectly well. We don't have to throw away any of the textbooks for things that work within a special case. And that's really where it comes down to. So consciousness related effects are outside the special case of what amounts to materialism as a set of assumptions. Some of those assumptions are wrong. And so when you start looking at these other philosophies of science, you begin to see that these kinds of things actually would be predicted and must occur. In fact, they do occur. So one of my complaints then is, at least within the way that science is taught in the United States, is it is never mentioned for a scientific or usually even engineering career that you're working under a set of assumptions or that there's a philosophy of science. This is not so much the tradition, say, in Germany, where they tend to include philosophy as part of a scientific curriculum. But I remember when I graduated, I had no idea that I was working within a worldview. I had never heard that word before. No one ever mentioned it. So you can come out of 20 plus years of education not knowing that you're working within a worldview. And the moment then you start entertaining that, oh, I'm working within a set of assumptions. Why didn't anybody tell me that before? Well, that's how you begin to unpack this, and that's why it takes an hour lecture to remind, especially people who don't know about philosophy, why when scientists say we don't need philosophy because they didn't develop the iPhone, I'm sorry, but that's just stupid. I mean, it's somewhere between ignorant and stupid. And I was ignorant and stupid too when I graduated because I didn't know about any of this stuff. Well, I was forced to learn about it in order to try to understand and get an answer to the very question that was just asked.
And
When
so
I
if I
was,
could just, oh,
oh, Max, go ahead.
yeah, I just want to ask one more question. So is it your position that consciousness related interactions, psychic phenomena, can't be explained in materialist terms?
It can't be explained in 17th century materialist terms. It is getting closer
Okay,
and
I see.
closer to being explainable through not existing quantum mechanics, but it's getting close. I would say that the next generation or two of the development in physics, we will have revised our meaning of the word material to such an extent that someone in the 17th century would say you're crazy to
I
entertain
see.
those ideas. And we can see that very clearly over the course of the 20th century, how difficult it was for people to wrap their minds around even the idea of non-locality. So yes, eventually we will have a materialistic explanation, but it won't look anything like what most people think of as material today.
Thank you.
Mm. Yeah,
Okay, so let me go, let me keep going and then hold your questions because where am I here? I'm getting close, I think. No, go ahead, ask a question.
I was just going to echo your sentiment. When I was teaching graduate courses, one of the things that I would do on the first day of the course is ask people what their orientation was, if they were, a functionalist, structuralist, whatever, and I got back blank looks.
Yeah,
And I got similar blank looks from some of the faculty as well when I would ask them, or their students would go and tell them what Hubbard was asking them in their class. So the lack of an appreciation of the philosophical underpinnings of the way that science is done is a huge problem.
yes. And that is the primary reason why there's so much resistance in science today. So I wanted to transition a little bit from random number generators into another line of research I've been doing with my colleague in Taiwan, Young Xia. And so one of them, we were looking at what happens when Buddhist monks bless something. So we took a big pot of oolong tea and we separated into two batches, and we had three Buddhist monks whose basically their job is to pray and bless. So we figured, okay, they're professional blessers. Have them bless this pot of oolong tea so that people who drank it would report an improved mood. And so we put it in little bottles. We recruited 100 people in each condition, double blind. So one blindedness was they didn't know what they were drinking. The second blindedness was the analyst who got the data did not know which was A and B. And nevertheless, when broke the blind, the people getting the blessed tea had a significant improvement in mood, as reported by a standardized mood reporting scale. So then we did another one looking at the growth of Arabidopsis thaliana seeds, and the primary measurement was the hypocaudal, which is the distance from the top of the root to the bottom of the first leaves. And a healthy plant, and the blessing was to make this plant grow better. So the healthy plant has a short, fat hypocaudal. And it looks that way because it doesn't have to push up much against the dirt to get to the sun, and also that it saves a lot of the energy that is in the seed so it can grow better. So a short, fat hypocaudal, we did the experiment 4 times. Each time was already replicated 3 times, and you can see by the error bars that overall it was very significant in the predicted direction. Then we did the same thing with human glioblastoma cells, looking at migration rates. So these are glioblastoma cells in vitro that are the growth medium is made with blessed or non-blessed water. In this case, the blessing was to make the glioblastoma not migrate so much because that's why it's so deadly. And so we got a significant effect there too. What about collective mental effects? People often say, well, if one person in a lab can make a random number generator do this, what if you have 1,000 people doing it, or 10,000, or a million people? And so we look at large-scale events that attract a lot of attention and ask, do extremes of human emotion and attention on a global scale affect the physical world at large? And if so, how could we detect such effects? Well, so there's Roger Nelson. He came up with this idea of taking these random number generators and putting them around the world and seeing whether that would change, whether the outputs would change during these events. So we're using a random number generator, and that's what it does. We use it to measure entropy in the shape of a bell curve. So we're looking for how the bell tolls, essentially, not just for thee, but for all of the these out there globally. We're looking for changes in variance. So the metaphor here is we have an ocean, we have some kind of a buoy in it, and we know that a tsunami occurs because we see a gigantic correlation among isolated buoys. So we're looking for gigantic correlations among isolated random number generators in an ocean of consciousness, as the metaphor. So we see if both spatial and temporal correlations arise, there's a tsunami, maybe that happens in the physical world. So these were the places where we had the random generators. We had 70 at the peak of this experiment. Every 5 minutes, they would take their we have a sample every second that consisted of 200 bits. So the sum of 200 bits was sent every 5 minutes up to a server at Princeton, and that's what formed the global network. The events that we looked at were large-scale events like acts of terrorism, deaths of celebrities, the Olympics, things like that, that were selected and then specified in terms of how long they lasted before we looked at the data. That was always the case. We see an event that we knew it was going to come up or an unexpected thing that happened. Say, okay, well, let's look at this for this period of time, and only looked at that piece of data. The method of analysis was predefined, and the whole database is publicly accessible, even today. It's about 112 gigabytes now. So here's just one example. So this was several days before 9/11 occurred, and you see a random walk pretty much around chance. 9/11 occurred, and boom. So this is a 0.05 probability envelope. It actually went far out of the expected envelope and stayed there for a couple of days. And so the formal experiment was 500 of these events from 1998 to 2015, a 7 sigma result. That's odds against chance of 3 trillion to 1. So you can see that the effect on any individual trial was typically not significant, maybe a z-score of 1, but it just kept accumulating. The average was a z-score of just about 1. So after 500 events, you can see it's way outside of chance expectation. And we looked at this in many different ways. For example, you take each of the events of these 500 events and you just slide it in time backwards and slide it in times forward. And if you're dealing with a real, quote, signal, you would, at time 0 for each event, you're going to get this red line. If you start pushing to the past and pushing to the forward, it drops down to 0 very quickly. So there's something special about the timing of these events. And again, they were all selected before the data was looked at. So,
A question on this.
yeah.
When you look to the past, was it significant for a little way ahead of time, or is that...
Yeah, you're asking, is there a global presentiment?
Yes, exactly.
Initially, we were thinking that for some kind of events there were, primarily earthquakes. There seemed to be some kind of event like this. All of these measures are based on all of the generators around the world. So it kind of looks like a non-local effect is happening. If there's an earthquake in Turkey, all of the generators go crazy a little bit. What we don't know is, was that literally a premonition, or was it a reaction to media afterwards, a precognition based on the world becoming aware of this tragedy? We don't know, and we didn't see it every single time. So
Yeah, but it sounds like you're saying that there was some presentiment that you found then.
in some cases, yes. For
Yeah.
9/11, around 3 hours before, we saw it beginning to to change pretty dramatically. But it's that kind of thing seems to be pretty rare. I mean, it happens, but does it happen often enough? Well, we don't know. So we're now working with Global Consciousness Project 2.0, which is a new system. It's already over 1,000 random generators. We're going to stop the development of the network at 4,000 generators to get a much higher density. For this exactly the same reason you'd want to use a high density EEG to do source localization, that kind of thing. So this is at gcp2.net. And these are the locations of the current system. We really, really want to fill in Africa and also China and Russia and Mongolia. So it's difficult for us to find anybody there who's willing to do it. Although we have one in Moscow now. I think we have one in St. Petersburg. It's easy to find places in North America and Europe, but we'd rather start filling in the rest of the world. So if you know somebody who in China or Mongolia or the eastern side of Russia who has an internet connection, they need actually a wired internet connection because the device that we made, which looks like this, is a fancy thing that you plug into a router. You don't have to do anything else. Everything else is automatic from that point. There's actually 8 Zener diodes in this thing, 2 of which are XORed together to create bits. And then so that creates 4 independent random sources, one of which is sequestered and will be sequestered probably for quite a long time. And the idea was if we see something like we saw in GCP1, uh, we still don't understand what is happening. The implication is there's a causal event. Lots of minds become coherent, and in a dual aspect monist way, well, then the physical world becomes coherent too. And we see that in the output of these generators. But presumably, if something big happens and you have hundreds of millions of minds paying attention, everything in the physical world changes. Like anything that we cared to measure would change, except that we don't have something running continuously, so we don't know. What we do have running continuously is this system because the statistics are easy to look at and then it becomes easy to understand. The interpretation, though, is still not settled. So we're dealing with telepathy, and the ones here in black is the ones I talked about. The ones in red are other classes that I haven't talked about, and there's a lot. So good luck in getting it peer reviewed. That used to be a really serious problem, that there were specialty journals, and then there's a lot of this in specialty journals and no one ever paid attention to. Fortunately, that is beginning to change. And so American psychologists a couple of years ago, a colleague in Sweden did 10 meta-analyses of different classes of experiments. And his conclusion is the evidence is comparable to that in psychology and other disciplines, just from an effect size point of view. 2 years before that, Jessica Utz was the president of the American Statistical Association. I met her when I was on the Stargate program because we were both on that program at the same time. And so she's kept up with the data as well. Her presentation to the assembled statisticians of the world was partially this. She said this, the data in support of precognition and possibly other related phenomena, by which she means remote viewing, are quite strong statistically and would be widely accepted if they pertain to something more mundane. So this then goes back to the notion of worldview, that for tens of thousands of years, the worldview was essentially one of enchantment. So it was when people assumed that there were spirits and supernatural explanations for how things work, and magic flourished. And then for about the past 500 years, we've been in a period of disenchantment where we imagine that these things could not exist and therefore they don't, but we are in the midst of a reenchantment period. So that's what I talk about in my latest book, that the paradigm change has been very slow over a long period of time. We are now beyond the knee of the curve. It's very clear when you look at what is being published now. there's a major change in terms of what people think about consciousness, and that the idea of being a scientist and studying consciousness beyond anesthesiology is now acceptable. So that's part of it. The last part of this book, I talk about how do you do magic, which is the practical side, because my previous book was in 2018. I did a similar exercise here, bringing the psi data up to date. But the most frequent feedback I got from people was, okay, I believe that there's something happening, but what do I do? So I tell them, here's what you do. And I'm going to end there. And so now we can really do questions.
That was outstanding.
I'm going to have a 2-minute bio break, and then
All
I'll be
right.
right back.
All right. Thanks. We'll ask questions ourselves, I guess, but
Yeah, well, here's a comment that Dean probably already knows, but I'm sure that these effects are larger than power stances, which I absolutely hate. Do we know
what are,
power stances?
no, what are they?
Vaughn does, right? You know, I might be, maybe there's a different name for it, but it's
No,
when
no,
you,
no.
if you, it's power
Standing with your
stance.
legs spread apart,
Yeah,
and maybe you
power
put your hands on
poses. Thank you,
put your hands on
Kirsten.
your hips too.
Yeah, stand like a
Um,
superhero to like jack yourself up for a meeting. It's supposed to
Yeah,
work real well.
I mean, I
Stick your
can see
pelvis
that.
out.
But
Look
I mean,
like a
that's like
weirdo in the
you make
hallway.
you're practicing the musculature or whatever of having a certain
Mm.
emotional state. I could see how that.
Yeah.
well, but the point, Mike, is that it doesn't. The studies don't replicate, so
Oh, all
that's
right.
why Jake doesn't like it. Or
Yeah.
there's this red dress effect that was all their rage for a while, and then careful replications didn't show that it was valid. So we have all sorts of, you know, phenomenon that seem to fit with our worldview that we accept for
Mm.
far longer than we should, you know.
Well, there might be an aspect of the power pose that is maybe a bit more legitimate if you look at the facial feedback hypothesis.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's no doubt that it fits nicely with that kind of thing. Well, I mean, think also about the anger pop-out phenomenon that was in many intro psych books until recently. The idea that an angry face pops out of a crowd. Well, this ends up not being true for a number of reasons, but it's very plausible. So it fits with the existing worldview, and people don't notice that it can't be replicated for quite some time. Whereas you have these strong demonstrations of something that doesn't fit with the scientific worldview, and it doesn't matter how much they are replicated, there are these headwinds that they can't overcome.
Hey, so it looks like Dean's back here. So I'm going to start with question number one.
Yeah.
So I like that the study that you and Roger Nelson did with the things all over the world. But I was also thought when you were talking about a crowd having an effect of the idea of you had just finished talking about a single person affecting the like the biofeedback or the like EMG or something of somebody else. Um, I mean, have you done things with like multiple, like a crowd trying to affect somebody? Like, so like did it add up so that that would have more of an effect or less, or
Uh, it's very difficult in working with a group of people who are being asked to do something abstract, like push a random generator around, because the metaphor that I use is that intention, especially coherent attention, is something like a soap bubble. It's a real structure. You can create it. It's very, very fragile. And so if you have 19 people in a group of 20 who are on the same wavelength, so to speak, and their internal belief is, I think I could do this, and one person is thinking, this is bullshit, it won't work.
well, I
It's
mean, that,
so
but that's I mean, would be good data in a way. Like I was thinking, staring detection. If you had like a video or something, and you
yeah,
have
no,
a
we've
narrator.
never tried feeling of being stared at with lots of people staring.
Yeah, that's what I wonder too. Because I mean, you might be right that if there's somebody in there going like, "This is bullshit," that it wouldn't, it wouldn't be coherent. That like whatever,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
That seems like it would be interesting though, because it's like it is. If you do studies where you have people being stared at and they can see the other people staring at them, and you have a bigger crowd, it seems like that gets a bigger physiological response. Like, oh my God, not, there's 30 people staring at me. People kind of freak out about that.
Well, of course, to do this in a really controlled environment, you'd put the person being stared at in a shielded place and only look at them on closed circuit TV.
Yeah. But that, yeah, so
So
I just went, says no one's done that, I guess.
no, it's partially because the way the infrastructure for doing this used to be pretty difficult. Now would be actually pretty easy. You can do it on
Yeah.
Zoom.
Well,
So
yeah, so we could get people from all over the world doing it or something.
yeah. So there's also the consideration of whether you want a conscious response, which is the way that Rupert Sheldrake has done these experiments. I've done them too, where you blank out the camera of the person who's being stared at, or somehow you hide it so that they don't know they're the target. So if you have a group like we have here, a random decision is made, and all of the screens would be on. But one of the people is the one who's being stared at, and you can't tell who I'm staring at because our positions on the screen are not the same. And then each person would afterwards, after 10 seconds or so, say, well, do you think you're being stared at or not?
Oh, so you have a controls then.
Yeah, you can have every single trial, somebody else is randomly selected. So I don't know how you would do that, maybe through the chat or something, but
Yeah.
yeah, so
Dean,
this
we have a relationship with Zoom that probably allows us to get under the hood and figure out how that random assignment was done. If you would like to explore that further, I think
yeah, I mean, we have a grant to look at brain to brain interactions. It's like a hyperscanning method, except that the two people are actually separate. So they're completely separate from each other. And we're using Zoom to vet people who claim that they've had telepathic experiences. Because before we bring them into the lab or use a functional MRI, we want to have some sense that they could actually do the task on demand. So we can see these things spontaneously, but it tends to be a very weak effect. For if you select people out, especially ones who have the experiences spontaneously, but also can kind of evoke them, those are the people you want to bring into the lab. So we're using Zoom as a vetting procedure, and it's sort of kludgy and not that great. So if we had a way of getting under the hood of Zoom and actually programmatically allowing it to do what you really want to do, that would be perfect. It'd be easy. I mean, we should all be doing these experiments.
that's a nice segue to a question I had. If I'm not stepping on your earlier question too much, Mike, did you have more to say?
Well, I just have one small comment on that though, because it seems like I'm just imagining as a participant trying to determine whether I'm being stared at, and so I can say like there's a TV camera on me instead of Zoom. Um, that it seems like I could get into more of a Gonspell-like state if it was just that. Then like something about Zoom to me, it's like it's kind of ramped up. It feels like I'm at a party and there's a bunch of people here. So
Right.
I mean, it might work better just to have not the Zoom. I mean, you could use Zoom to stare maybe at the person, but the person maybe is not seeing anybody. They're just trying to
Well,
relax and Gonspell it or whatever. And that then there's the Zoom turns them on and off or whatever.
the much better way of doing this rather than conscious report is to use a physiological measure
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So we could do that.
because then you don't have to say anything. Your unconscious is handling the whole business. And as best as we can tell, all of these phenomena are bubbling up from the unconscious anyway.
Well, but so does that work? I mean, I might be wrong about this, but it seems like that might work better if they were in a Gonspell state than if they're like looking at a whole bunch of Zoom things, or does that not matter?
It I don't know anyone who's actually put people in the Ganzfeld state to do this, because usually, in a lab at least, the person who's being the receiver on this is in a comfy chair. They're all wired up. They can't move around very much because we tell them not to, and they're doing nothing. There's
Yeah,
nothing to do. So the main thing is we don't want them to fall completely asleep because they might accidentally go into deep sleep. If they fall into a light sleep, that actually could help.
yeah.
So we don't think you don't need a Ganzfeld state in that
Yeah.
condition because there's no distractions. There's the white noise. There's the you don't.
All
So
right.
physiological measures are the way to go, even in this context. If you had people with some kind of cheap skin conductance monitor or heart rate monitor, heart rate also works.
Like a
That would be the way to
like
do
a
it.
smartwatch or something.
Yeah.
All right, go, Vaughn. You can have it.
Oh, well, I was going to just ask across all of these studies, sometimes these studies select for people that are good at a particular uh, kind of paranormal task. And then other times it's looking across a broad set of people. What's the ratio? Do most studies select people that are already claiming to be good or have demonstrated some capacity? Is there like a test retest approach where you put people in one task and those that score well, you then move to a new task and you discover that these are, people that really do seem to be able to tap into this. And that seemed to be related to what you were saying about using Zoom to figure out if people actually have these experiences. What's the ratio of experiments that require finding populations that work with the task versus not?
Well, it's all of the above. And if there's a split, the split usually is in the academic world, you get college sophomores doing something for credit who are unselected.
Okay.
Outside, like within our institute, we advertise for people of certain types. We want meditators, we want healers, we want people who've had these experiences, we have mediums. And so they're coming in with a claim that they have these experiences. And generally, we try to vet them beforehand. So, like mediums, for example, again, in the Northern California area, every other person is a medium.
Yeah.
They're all mediums. Everyone's a medium.
Yeah.
So, so it's not clear whether that's true or not. So we ask for clients that we can talk to say, well, were they any good? And do you think they were real? And we do that kind of vetting as much as we can. Sometimes we also ask them to take online not for mediums so much, for people claiming to have other abilities. Um, and the online tests are very abstract and very simple, but some people are quite good at that. So at least gives us some sense, yeah, they have some ability. That's how we tend not to pull from anybody walking on the street.
What are the? Can you describe the online tests any better?
Which test? Oh,
The
the online
online
test.
ones instead,
Yeah,
like in
so
case we wanted to try doing that.
Well,
well,
yeah, I was going to say, is there a way that
I'll put it in the chat.
Uh,
when you discover these uh, participants, part of what you're doing is trying to get them to replicate their abilities in a controlled experimental environment. But
Yep.
another way to explore this, which I'm sure you've thought about and probably done, is to ask them, how did you develop this? Was this always just something that was there, or were there things that you did that caused it to happen? Did a particular event happen that gave rise to your awareness of this capacity? Because then you're building a kind of roadmap for the people that don't show up with these skills to discover the latent possibilities. Or maybe it's the case that there's just some people that can do it and some people can't. What do you think?
Well, there's a little bit of nature and nurture going on. So we're interested in the genetics of psychic talent because now we have methods where we can look at the genetics. So we did a small case control study where we recruited people who said they were psychic from psychic families. They answered a bunch of questionnaires. They did in-person interviews over Zoom. Eventually, we selected about a dozen who fit that. We got their DNA. And then we got matched controls. Again, even though we had a worldwide selection here, it was way more difficult to find the controls than it was to find people who had these claims. And we found a difference in an intron sequence. So it wasn't like a gene, it was the between the genes, the intron. So we need $10 million to do this right. We didn't have that much money. The sequencing is fortunately coming down in costs. The bioinformatics part of it, like if we do GWAS or we do RNA-seq, there are all these methods that can be used. Those are relatively cheap. Even getting the DNA is not a problem. It's the sequencing cost. So we want at least 10,000 people in the cases and controls in order to really get this.
Hmm.
The most recent version we did on this was we had people who had done 23andMe or Ancestry.com who were interested in this to fill out a questionnaire of different kinds of experiences that they've had. And then they downloaded their genome and they sent it to us. So we got 100 people to do that. And we then ended up with an analysis looking at what SNPs were different according to what correlated with the experiences that they had. And we ended up with about 100 SNPs that survived multiple analysis, including one that had a probability of 10 to the minus sixth. Most of them were pretty close to like 0.05, which is not that interesting, even though corrected for multiple analysis. So the one SNP at a 10 to the minus 6 probability, you look at it, again, it's an intron sequence. I mean, a SNP is a tiny little sequence, but it was from an intron. And what all of that suggests is maybe everyone has some ability here, but for many people, it's not turned on in
Mm.
an epigenetic sense. So maybe being in a family where people are open to this stuff, it allows something to express that otherwise is not expressed because most people are taught if these weird things happen, don't talk about them. And so
Yeah,
this
so
is
by
something.
the same token, if we've lived in a world that doesn't value this and actually punishes you if you talk about it, those epigenetic switches could have been turned off in a
Yeah,
large number of people. So you could find different populations around the world where you would not have that kind of constraint that should be expressed more often.
right. So we did a sociological genetic analysis to see whether there are regions of the world where this particular intron sequence was found that had the difference between the two groups. And we did find a place, which the way I like to describe it is the where the ancient Holy Roman Empire used to be, plus or minus about one country. That portion of the world has a deficit of that particular intron sequence. Sorry, the other way around. It has more of that intron sequence, which turns out to make sense from the point of view of the Inquisition. Anybody who is presenting strange abilities, like a witch, was killed. And
Mm.
so, through a pruning process, historical pruning, it looks like the genetics of the area was changed so that people were less psychic there. And so
Wow,
the
that's
original,
incredible.
yeah, I
That's
mean,
really
that's like,
beautiful.
holy smoke. So we then thought, well, it would be nice to target some place like northern Scotland, where they had the legends of the second sight, it's clairvoyance, or the Celtic people, or lots of people around the world have legends of people who are psychic. Like that was not a big thing. When I've given lectures in India, I always was curious as to why in India people kind of accept this stuff, but nobody's doing any research on it. Well, what's going on here? So I gave a talk once at the University of Allahabad in a cognitive neuroscience department. And I was talking about telepathy and saying, well, I see you have all the equipment. And they were completely on board with it. They said, well, yeah, that's pretty good, but why are you even bothering to study it? Well, I said, well, at least in the West, we don't even know if telepathy exists. At least there's a lot of criticism or skepticism. And so I said, well, why aren't you studying this? You guys accept it. Basically, the answer was, well, why bother? We know it exists.
Because this was this Narayanan Srinivasan's group in Allahabad.
Actually, that sounds very familiar.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know the guy.
yeah,
I totally imagined that he would say that. Well, why
yeah.
would this be surprising? Why would we look at it?
Why would you
He's
want to
done
do this?
some
I mean,
really cool things with
he had a
EEG and
statue of
so on
Ganesh on his
recently.
desk, and everybody is on board with it. So I
Yeah,
felt
yeah.
well, anyway. So that's, I mean, there are definitely these kinds of phenomena are the reactions to it is different depending on culture. And so it's like the worst possible culture to do this sort of research is the United States. It's a couple of European countries. On the other hand, it also means that what we do, what we're forced to do, is be extremely rigorous in how we do it. And so there's value on both sides. So we're like working from an opposite side of a confirmation bias where we're thinking,
Mhm.
well, this is stupid, except people keep reporting it nevertheless. So let's figure out a way of seeing if we can convince ourselves that this is actually real.
Hmm.
The idea of entanglement, non-locality, and the other aspects of psi that you've looked at suggest to me that this objective ideal of a wall between the observer and the phenomena is in error, and that science would seem to be more participatory than strictly objective observational. So, given kind of that observation and your experience, how has what you've done changed your worldview?
Yeah, we are. The fact that we are embodied is continually reminding us that, or at least giving us the illusion that we are separate and isolated. These phenomena suggest that that is not entirely true. And it's very, very difficult in an everyday sense to think beyond that, to think of these kinds of connections that occur because we see them in the lab and we know they happen in the real world too. So my own sense was that I was in ontological shock for probably the first 5 years or so. I was at Bell Labs at the time when I started doing this seriously. Uh, and I didn't know how to reconcile it. I didn't feel like I was going crazy, but I really felt sort of schizophrenic in that all of my training was brought to the point where I completely accepted materialism without knowing that I was accepting anything. But that was the worldview where I had to try to understand how things worked. And yet I was seeing these kinds of primarily mind-matter interaction effects that we were doing in the labs. Uh, it finally took a friend of mine who is more metaphysically oriented than I was to say, well, you're being blocked by your imagination. It's what you can imagine to be. And that's sort of, that set me on the road to understanding that there was a philosophy of science. And that's where I finally was able to reconcile that, say, oh, why didn't anybody tell me that these are assumptions? And well, I don't know why they didn't mention it, but they didn't. So I was brought up within a worldview that didn't admit that this stuff could be real because it really felt a lot like magic at that point.
Well, those people didn't know that they had those assumptions either. So how
Exactly.
could they communicate that to you?
You have many generations of professors who are brought up in the same ideas. And if we look back on behaviorism now, and we can say, well, why were there like 4 or 5 generations of academic psychologists who didn't think that there was consciousness, which is the only thing anybody has in the first place? So that I'd like to refer to that as the period of time when academic psychology lost its mind, literally.
Literally.
It's like gone. So,
What
so I think we always will look back on history and see how naive and stupid we were back then, and we're always in that. We're in that right now as well. We'll look back eventually and say, "Oh, they used to believe this. Can you believe that?" No. So
what
I
do
don't know
you
exactly what that will be, other than we will look back at someday in the future and say, they used to not even think that psychic phenomena were real, and students then will say, "Well, really? I mean, how could they have missed it?"
what what do you think are some of the core materialistic assumptions that are standing in the way of broader acceptance of psychic phenomena?
Well, the main one is that consciousness is a side effect of brain processing. And so this was what gives rise to books like You Are Your Brain. Full stop. That's it. So that assumption is probably wrong. That's not to say that we are not partially our brain, because if you start scooping out bits of brain, then your experience certainly does change. Uh, but it's not completely that. So as you would find in virtually all of the spiritual traditions, that there's something like that consciousness is not generated by the brain. And so the alternative model there is that the brain is extremely good at filtering consciousness, which is somehow out there. And by consciousness, I'm talking specifically about the fact of awareness. That's the mystery. The mystery is, why do we have any subjective experience at all? And so a lot of people now, or at least some people, are saying, well, their AI chatbot is sentient. It has self-awareness. Well, no, it doesn't. It's simulating it. Well, if that's simulating it, well, why aren't we simulating it? And then the question is, well, if we were simulating it, then who's having that experience? So it becomes pretty complex very quickly, but the moment you can entertain the idea that consciousness is more than just brain activity, and especially that it is not limited to the ordinary senses, so that it has non-local characteristics, and also has agency, meaning free will, can do stuff, suddenly the whole notion that there should be psychic experiences becomes obvious. So others like to point out that is it a coincidence that quantum mechanics has non-locality and observer effects, which are so close, correlated at least, with what people report as psychic phenomena? Some physicists will say that's a coincidence. You're using one mystery to explain another mystery. And I would say, yes, they're both mysterious, but they're so closely correlated that it couldn't possibly be just a fluke, that physics has finally caught up to the fact of what our internal experience has been telling us from the first day we were Homo sapiens. And by the way, it's not just humans. We see similar effects in animals. We're beginning to work on plants. Anytime you work with a plant, it's always you get a confound because you don't know whether the experimenter was doing the effect or the plant was doing the effect. So I think I finally came up with a protocol that might actually show that plants can manipulate their environment too through a kind of an agency. And the way to do it is that in plant physiology, you can measure whether a plant needs water, usually by measuring put a clamp on a leaf, and you can measure the turgidity of the leaf, how much water's in it. Or you can use a light flash and then look at a spectrographic response of whether it wants light through chlorophyll fluorescence. And you can measure humidity and temperature and a bunch of other things. So you measure all of those. You get a plant, you measure all of those things, you stick it in a dark closet where there's a light that's controlled by a random number generator, and there's water pumped that could be controlled by a random number generator, and on and on and on. And then what you look at when you come back and you open the closet after a month, if it's still alive, did the random generator do its thing when the plant needed that particular thing? So will you see a diurnal effect of light happening because the random generator was triggered? Will you see water coming? Will you see all the things that it needs? That way, while an experimenter had to set it up to do the experiment, they don't need to look at it for quite a long time. And so I've accidentally done a few experiments like that where I set something up and then I went away on a trip and I forgot that I even had an experiment running. Well, probably unconsciously didn't forget, but at least consciously, I didn't know that this thing was going still. And I came back and said, oh, we have this thing running in the lab, and then look at the data, and we do see interesting effects where we get like one step away from experimenter effects. So the plant thing, I think, would help too, but I'm thinking the way to really do it is you set the whole thing up and then you get a big shot of Versed, which erases your entire memory of the whole thing. So then you really can't influence the results. So I need to find a friendly nurse somewhere who has access to Versed and can erase memory. Because other than that, I don't know how to extract the experimenter at all. And so part of the question that was raised, which I was going to mention, is our current epistemology adequate for studying these kinds of phenomena? Well, it's adequate enough so that we can use the epistemologies we're used to see effects, but the effects are usually tiny. We need a lot of statistics to get them, partially because it's artificial and it's in a laboratory and on demand and so on. But we have control tests, which we're very proud of, and double blinds, which we're proud of, and none of that would matter if this stuff is real. And I think that this stuff is real. In which case, when we do an experiment involving a control, that's actually not a control. So the pair lab looked at this in some detail. They looked at the experimental data where people are trying to push random generators around, and then they had it running under control conditions. And what they find in the control conditions is a squished variance, which means intention to push the randomness closer to chance than it should be. So there are no controls. As long as there are people involved who or know something about the experiment, this is even bad when you say, well, we'll use college sophomores who don't even know what they're doing. Just have them do it. There's an experimenter somewhere who knows what's going on. So this is chronic problem of the source of psi. We don't know what the source of it is. And now that we do global effects, now they're like the whole planet is involved. So it raises all kinds of very interesting epistemological questions that, among other things, probably requires that anybody who really wants to get into this kind of research needs to take either LSD or 5-EO, 5, what is it, 5-MeO DMT, the toad, uh, or just take DMT to get a sense of like blasting through the assumptions of the way that the world works, and maybe through those kinds of experiences develop an epistemology that is actually adequate for what we do.
What about, I mean, the epistemology of ancient India, the Vedic epistemology might have alternatives, you know? I mean, that's another, we could source our epistemology in Eastern, as so many, so many of those classic books that relate Eastern mysticism to Western physics tried to do. I mean,
Yep.
there are ways maybe there, but even then, I'm thinking that, if you think about non-locality, that is a really interesting thing from a physics perspective, because you've got apparently faster than light travel that's allowing these two things to happen at distances far apart from each other. But if you've got some phenomenon that allows precognitive awareness of what's going to happen, well, then even non-locality is something that is ungrounded or is not as surprising as it otherwise would be in a world in which time is unfolding along some kind of advancing frontier. So I don't know, like, can we even envision what the epistemology is that we need for this?
In addition to that, there's if every type of life form, like if plants are affecting the things around them, then probably amoebas are doing that, and we're all connected in this complex network of oneness or whatever. That I think it's really hard to model
Yeah,
anything. Like there might be like all the people that are skeptical are like contributing to this network that is going to fight.
yeah,
And that was one of the things I thought was interesting about the Princeton labs results, that they kept testing more and more things for their ball dropping one.
yeah,
And so if it was a constant effect size, then it should have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And yet it looked to me like when they were done, it just sort of didn't continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It sort of it stayed sort of similar significance level.
yeah. Yeah, and they also did a fair number of sequential experiments to see, because I see one of the questions here was about the decline effects, which is definitely a thing. So they wanted to know if you take something like a simple ESP card test and you do it again and again and again. So there, I think the reason why there's a big decline is through simply people get bored. You get bored very quickly and those sorts of things. So there's something like you need spontaneity, you need a sense of naivete, certain innocence, which is very difficult to evoke each time. But that seems to be part of it. So something about the attitude that you bring to a task like that. So any experiment that involves lots and lots of repeated trials, the statistical counter in your head starts revolving, and that gets in the way. There's all lots of sources of noise. But they were doing tests, repeated tests with random number generators. And what they would find is first timer effect. We see it again and again. In lots of domains, you see this. So the first timer effect, huge effect sizes, everybody's happy. We found the Holy Grail. The second time it's smaller, the third time it's smaller. It keeps getting smaller, but it doesn't go to zero. If you keep going on that sequence, it bounces back, but it never reaches first timer. So it asymptotes above chance, but it never gets as high as it was in the first time. So there's something about that first time, innocence or something, which again, experiment with Versed. Do this task and then give them a shot. And now do this task again. So they just sort of keep erasing their ability. The
But I mean,
closest I know of anybody who's done this is a colleague at a neurologist at a hospital in Toronto who's worked with brain damaged patients who left frontal lobe damage. They do a random number generator test and they do not show the decline.
mm,
So it's as though their analytical side of their brain is basically injured. It's not there anymore. It has a lesion. And so they're always fresh. They're always doing it for the first time and they're able to
Mm.
sustain a
Hmm.
significant result.
So, Dean, uh, do the people know, the first timers, are they told how well they did the first time?
Usually there's feedback. Yeah.
I wonder if this is like they've got the yips in baseball. Like they
Yes.
just pitched a no-hitter and now they go out with the intention of doing it again and they can't.
Right. They
No, but
can't be
even if you
largely
did
because
do it,
they don't know what it is that they did.
Right. And but they're trying to get it back.
They're
Yeah,
trying. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it also might be it's the first couple of times it's this really exciting kind of thing. After a while, it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of cool, but not as cool as it was the first
Yeah.
time.
Well, what else is new? So that's when that's the entree to show my bent spoon.
Oh,
So my first timer effect, bent the bowl in half, have never been able to repeat it because I tried to go back into the mindset that I was in when I could do this. I don't know what I did. I know I did
uh,
it. And so part of it was fear because I didn't know what I did. And this is now a permanent object. It doesn't melt. It's not nitinol. It's not all that. But when I was flying back home after going to this conference where I did this, I had an identical spoon. I was like looking at the bent one, looking at the other one, thinking, okay, do it. I suddenly got like a rush of horror when I realized, A, I didn't know how I did it, and B, I'm inside a metal can that's 30,000 feet up in the air. I don't want to
uh,
soften any of the metal up here.
hmm
And that kind of that was like the
Hmm.
the fear of spoon in me, because I didn't know what I did.
Hmm.
I kind of remember what it felt like to do it. And before I did that, I was pretty well convinced that it was impossible.
Hmm. That brings up an interesting point, though. How much of psi would be implicit as opposed to explicit, and could there be ways to make it more explicit?
Well, I think almost all of it is implicit. It's some part of your unconscious that knows how to do things like this. And when you bring it to your conscious awareness, fear is a common reaction. Um, the difficulty in believing what just happened, and easy memory loss as well. Like I know people who have done things like this, and then later I'd ask them about it, and they have no memory of it. The object is still there, but they have no memory of even having gone to such a thing because
Hmm.
it's like erased because I need to reset because I don't know what to think about this.
Mm.
there's also, it seems like possible that other people that that you're connected to have an effect on that, so that if they're skeptical or don't want you to be doing that for some reason, that
Yeah.
it just seems that I was thinking that might be partly what's going on with the Princeton labs result. It's like there's enough significance that it can keep the sympathetic people happy. Like, look, there's evidence here, and then the people that are not sympathetic is like, look, it's not very strong. They're
Yeah.
both. There's sort of some kind of balance of like society and everybody
Yeah,
keeping the
there's,
results that they're left.
even among scientists, I find that there's a conflation between existence and efficacy, which, like, if you know anything about statistics, who cares how big the thing is? The only thing that matters is you have confidence in the results. And so I've had to explain this again and again, even to like groups of physicists.
And,
Like, the electron is not a very big thing, but we have high confidence that it exists for lots of reasons, and we can measure it too. But we measure it, it's a tiny, tiny thing. So people said, well, who cares? It's only like 10 to the minus gazillion in terms of coulombs. Well, the world runs on that now because we understand it better. So let's say that magic slash psi is a tiny, tiny little thing, but real. Well, 14 generations from now, we'll have not electricity based on electrons, but magics or something. We make things work purely through these tiny little things that we figured out to the extent where we can now make batteries and hold it or something like that.
Mm.
Which harkens back to the epistemology issue. The reason why this might not be
Yeah.
accepted or denied or pushed down is because it doesn't fit the epistemology.
except the paradox is the epistemology that we currently have can show it. It just shows it as a tiny little thing. We're generally
Well,
requiring lots of statistics.
Yeah, but
there's no,
within the more materialistic version of that. But yeah.
The ancient materialistic version, yes.
no, I think there's also, I'll call it a power structure or emotional kind of thing that if you're the people that are in charge of the institutions of power don't want to change the dynamics. And so, independent of what's true or not, they might just be like, oh, we don't want this to knock us off our perch. Then somebody else will be in charge of all these big decisions and stuff.
Well, that's true. There's also very clear cases of disinformation that have occurred. And there's a strong parallel with the UFO business. So we're slowly hearing stories now about how there's, for at least 80 years, we've known that there's things in the sky and things in the ocean that we don't understand. And the government knows that. And the government, meaning certain branches of the government, have very stringently and specifically targeted this for that only Farmer Bob from the outback are the ones who report this, which has never been the case. But nevertheless, that's it's part of the woo-woo paranormal things. The same is true for psi. I know for a fact that when we were working on Stargate, the U.S. Army did a study to match their motto at the time, which is "Be all you could be," which I think they're becoming back now. Then maybe they're using that again. So part of that was that they were looking into hypnosis and acupuncture and a bunch of other things, including psi, within the Army as something that maybe they wanted to train. So they commissioned the National Research Council to do a review of these things. And none of them worked, according to the review. And they made a special effort in the media circus that went along with this to say, well, we've looked at the data from parapsychology over the last 300 years, and none of it works. It's like not a thing. And reported by all the media outlets. And then I was president of the Parapsychological Association at the time. And so I said, well, that's what the media is saying. But when you look at the actual report that was written and published, that's not what it said. It said the Army thinks that maybe we should probably fund some of this stuff. And oh, by the way, they were actively funding Stargate, which was top secret at the time. So on the one hand, the message that was being pushed in the media is there's nothing going on here, don't even bother. At the same time, funding a classified program exactly on that topic. So that's only one case of a number that I know that were like that, where somebody decided that it was useful as a tool within the intelligence company or business to use this stuff, but then to deflect attention on the public's point of view and also from our adversaries. Of course, the irony is within that secret program, we were very well aware that the Russians had a program. We suspected and probably were correct that the Chinese had a program as well. Very well funded. That is probably still true today.
I seem to remember hearing that India was also investigating a similar thing in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Probably all major governments certainly have been tracking. I once gave a talk in Australia for government ministers there. And one of the people there was the general, I think, in charge of their defense, the defense ministry. So I gave this whole long talk about, because Stargate was already declassified at that point. And I talked about what we did and all that stuff. Later, he comes up to me and said, we actually knew all of that. No, I think, how in the world did you know that? That was classified at the time. Well, there's the sharing that goes on among allies, but this was above secret. This was above top secret at the time. Even the code word Stargate was classified. Like if you accidentally found out what the word you heard of the code word, you could not find out what it referred to say nothing of the rest of the program. So very highly classified secret, and yet other countries knew about it, were following it. So yeah, I don't completely understand that at all.
But did you know about what the Russians and Chinese were doing somewhat? How? Through.
The Russians had a big program in remote viewing.
But did you know? I mean, because of like using paranormal means or something, or that was just good spies?
We had inside information. Um, and on both sides, it was similar in the sense that they were selecting people mostly from the military who were exceptionally good at their jobs in the military. And they were then tested for generally for like super intuition. They just knew the right thing to do at the right time, so they weren't killed. The Russians did that too. A big difference was our people were at Fort Meade outside of the National Security Agency doing remote viewing of things around the world. They put their remote viewers on the front. And
Oh,
so we knew for sure that there were some that were in the fighting that was going on in Chechnya at the time with remote viewers on the front lines. So later there was a detente and they were asked, well, why did you bother to put these highly trained people on the front lines of an active war? Because they could have done it from back in Moscow or something. And they said, well, they thought it would provide more motivation, which I imagine is probably true, but it wasn't necessary. Our guys didn't need to do that at all.
hmm.
So
Man,
it looks like it's dinner time now.
Uh,
2 minutes to
yeah,
Yeah,
go.
well,
this was a terrific talk though.
Mhm.
What a treat. Thank you so much.
well,
yeah.
let's give
Yeah, thank
Dean
you.
another round of applause here. Thanks so much for sharing with us. And as I said at the beginning, you're now a lifetime Samba member. We meet this time every week. If you want, we could add you to the mail list and see what we're talking about. But we could talk about maybe figuring out a way for you to get some subject uh, pool
Yes,
time
as I said,
classes.
I have an experiment on retrocausation, which requires 300 people, according to the power analysis, and it's only a 10-minute task.
So Vaughn,
Can
maybe you and
you
I can look into
Yeah,
that.
I have a group of could you do it with online students?
Yeah, it's online.
Because I've got a couple of sections of an intro class next semester, and I'm always looking for things like this. It would be lovely. So
That would be great.
I also have some thoughts about places in Africa for you to put the random number generators.
Even better.
Okay. Well, I'll
So,
be in
okay,
touch.
so send me your email so I'll be able to send you the link to the experiment and any other things we want to follow up on.
Yeah, I'll do that in a little bit. I'm gonna have to run to another meeting right now,
Okay, so
but
I'm
Well,
easy to find.
and know
There's
that
my email in the
you have a
chat.
group of
perfect.
know that you have a group of supportive people here.
Good.
Yeah.
So one other thing for the students, this is the last seminar of the semester, and we since it's a class, first of all of you guys earned A's because you did great on your presentation, and second of all, if you could turn in evaluations for the seminar, that would be helpful to us because we have a higher percentage of that. Um, so that's the online thing that you should have been emailed. Um, so if you can do that. But yeah, this was, I thought, a really great seminar. And the whole semester, we had a lot of, I guess, capped it up with today's talk.
Good.
But
Mhm.
thanks again, Dean. And if there's any way we could help you out, let us know too.
Well, I've heard two very good things so far.
All right. We heard a lot of good things too then. So
Yeah.
everybody else, I think that's it for this semester. We'll meet again. Anyone that wants to sign up for next semester, we love having you back again. Same time, same website. And even if you don't sign up as a class, you're welcome to come back and just um, hang out. Well, I'll leave you on the Canvas email list until you tell us to get you off of it.
Good.